Hey, what's up, guys? Welcome back to the Mana Fix. So, Adventures of the Forgotten Realms came out not too long ago, and I wanted to put out another awesome deck tech for you guys. And I'm doing something I wouldn't normally do this time, and that's covering a mono white deck. I know, and some of you thought I was a Simic guy, didn't you?
Not today.
Real quick, if you enjoy the video, please make sure to like, hit that subscribe button, and click on the bell so you don't miss out on any future videos. I'm trying to grow this channel and my goal is to get it monetized by the end of the year, and I won't be able to do that without your support. So thank you. Alright, now let's get on with the deck tech. Today we're talking about Oswald Fiddlebender. Oswald costs 1 white and 1 other for a 2/2 legendary gnome artificer. He has an activated ability where we can pay 1 white, tap him, and sacrifice an artifact to search our library for an artifact card with mana value equal to 1 plus the sacrificed artifact's mana value. Put it onto the battlefield, and then shuffle. Activate this ability only as a sorcery. This kind of reminds me of a Prime Speaker Vanifar, but for artifacts, and much cheaper. So yeah, we're building a combo deck. We're going to slow down the game if we need to while searching for our combo pieces until we're able to win the game. Alright, so as we typically do on this channel, we'll cover the ramp cards, most of which are, you guessed it, artifacts. We're running a lot of staples like Soul Ring, Arcane Signet, Felwar Stone, Mind Stone, Thought Vessel, and Wayfarer's Bauble. These are really solid options in a mono-white artifact deck. Another similar card that isn't really a staple, at least not yet, is Liquimetal Torque. This is a 2-mana artifact that taps for 1 colorless mana, but it has the added ability of being able to tap it to make a permanent an artifact until end of turn. I'm not sure what sort of practical use that ability has in this deck, if any, but it's a 2-mana artifact that ramps us, so we'll take it. With our commander being available at 2 mana, 0-cost artifacts can allow us to cast him on turn 1. In this deck, we're running Chrome Mox, Lotus Petal, and Mana Crypt as options for dropping a turn 1 Oswald. Chrome Mox will force us to exile a card from our hand, but that's alright when your goal is winning the game as fast as possible. Lotus Petal is a 0-mana artifact that we sacrifice for 1 mana of any color. This is also a combo piece, but we'll talk about that later. Mana Crypt is obviously a fantastic card, albeit a little expensive, but also allows us to cast our commander on turn 1. We've got a couple more 0-mana artifacts that don't necessarily enable a turn 1 Oswald, but are still great cards. Mox Opal can be tapped for 1 mana of any color as long as we control 3 or more artifacts. Mox Amber can be tapped for 1 mana of any color among legendary permanents we control. Since Oswald is so cheap, odds are we'll have him on the battlefield most of the time, so as long as we aren't casting this card on turn 1, it'll tap for 1 white. We've got other rocks like Mana Vault and Basalt Monolith. The Monolith is actually a combo piece, but again, we're going to talk about that later. Archaeomancer's Map is a great card, and this one just came out somewhat recently in Commander 2021. When this artifact enters the battlefield, we search our library for 2 Plains cards and put them into our hand. This also has a burgeoning-esque effect that allows us to play lands whenever our opponents do, but only if they control more lands than us. Still, this card is great because it allows us to draw cards and it ramps us. Then we have a few cards that reduce the cost of our artifact spells. Cloud Key and Foundry Inspector are each going to reduce the cost of our artifacts by 1 mana. Semblance Anvil requires us to exile an artifact from our hand when we cast it, but it's going to reduce the cost of our artifacts by 2. Another common staple we're including in this deck is Smothering Tithe. As in any white deck, this is incredible ramp, but the treasures are good for more than just mana. They can also be sacrificed to Oswald to search up a 1-mana artifact. The last ramp card here is Metalworker. This little guy is absolutely nuts in artifact-heavy decks. When we tap him, we can reveal any number of artifact cards from our hand, and when we do, we get 2 colorless mana for each card revealed this way. Even if we have only 1 artifact card in our hand, that's not bad. But any more than that, and we are getting more than enough value from this creature. So now that we've got the ramp cards out of the way, let's talk about our game plan, and more specifically, the way we're going to control the game. Stacks. When you're running artifacts, stacks can be a great way to slow the game down while you're figuring out a way to win the game. That's exactly what we're going to do with these cards. First on the list here are Sphere of Resistance and Lodestone Golem. These cards will make it harder for our opponents to cast their spells. Sphere of Resistance is universal in that it makes all spells cost 1 additional mana. This may seem bad, but it's actually great. I mean, we just got done going over 20 ramp cards that we're running in this deck. We're going to have plenty of mana to cast our spells, so this won't hurt us nearly as much as it might hurt our opponents. Lodestone Golem is an even better version of this effect though, because it specifies non-artifact spells. Most of the spells that we want to cast are artifacts, so we won't have to pay that additional mana most of the time. But if our opponents aren't running artifact decks, this one is going to hurt. Another great Stax effect in this deck is Hikori, Dust Drinker. This guy is super mean. With Hikori on the battlefield, lands don't untap during their controller's untap step. Instead, that player untaps only one land at their upkeep. This is bad for everyone, but not all that bad for us. Much of our mana is going to come in the form of artifacts, which aren't affected by Hikori. A lot of the time you'll find with this card that your opponents are playing a land, maybe playing one spell, and then passing, whereas we're pretty much able to operate as normal. Winter Orb has almost the same exact effect, but on a 2-mana artifact, which is better because we can tutor it up with our commander. If I'm being honest, this is probably going to be a fairly common turn 2 or turn 3 play if you're really trying to win the game. Yeah, don't count on making any friends if you're playing this deck.
Leave me alone, I hate you!
Oh, and it gets worse, so buckle up, kids. Next, let's talk about Aethersworn Canonist. This artifact basically says that each player can only play one non-artifact spell per turn. So a lot of the time, this is going to limit our opponents to one spell per turn, but again, for us, we're mostly running artifacts, so this doesn't hinder our game plan much, if at all. We're also running Torpor Orb. Whether or not this is considered a Stax card is debatable, but this card prevents so many decks in the meta from doing what they're designed to do. There are tons of decks in Commander that rely in part or entirely on Enter the Battlefield effects. Even if this isn't a main theme of the deck, a lot of the time Enter the Battlefield effects are included for value. Like for example, a Nikia of the Old Ways deck running Soul of the Harvest. This is a great way to slow down our opponents with minimal impact to our own strategy. Draneth Magistrate is another card that can do that. This guy says that our opponents can't cast spells from anywhere but their hands. This stops some graveyard shenanigans, but it also just says that our opponents can't cast their commanders from the command zone, so that's mainly the reason we're running it. Finally, it's the granddaddy of all Stax cards and probably a contender for the most hated card in the format, and that's Armageddon.
You're sick! You're evil!
That's right. Who needs lands when you have all the artifacts? This is most likely going to take your opponents out of the game completely and hopefully make it so that you're the only player with any mana. Now the only thing we would need to do from here is find a win condition. So what are our win conditions? Well, what we're trying to do is combo out in one of many different ways. There are tons of combos in this deck, but many of them will involve a card called Blasting Station. This card has an activated ability where we tap it and sacrifice a creature to deal 1 damage to any target. It also says whenever a creature comes into play, we can untap it. So what we want to do is find a way to infinitely sacrifice creatures to Blasting Station so that we can deal infinite damage to our opponents. Many of the combos with this card also involve Teshar, Ancestor's Apostle. Teshar helps us complete the combo because it's going to bring a creature back from the graveyard every time we cast an artifact spell. These two can be combined with Mishra's Bauble and Junk Diver for infinite damage. So if we have these cards on the battlefield, the first thing we'll do is sacrifice the Bauble to its own ability. Next, we sacrifice Junk Diver to the Blasting Station, dealing 1 damage to an opponent. When Junk Diver dies, it returns the Bauble to our hand. We then cast the Bauble, triggering Teshar, and returning Junk Diver from our graveyard to the battlefield. When Junk Diver enters, that untaps the Blasting Station, allowing us to repeat the combo all over again. Junk Diver can be replaced with Workshop Assistant, Scrap Trawler, or Mer Retriever. Likewise, Lotus Petal or Ornithopter can both take the place of Mishra's Bauble. There are still combos available with Teshar if we don't have access to Blasting Station. Having Ashnod's Altar with these other 3 cards is a combo too. This one only gives us infinite mana and won't necessarily win us the game. But if we're able to use that mana to draw cards with the Staff of Domination or something similar, that will allow us to find a way to win. Another good infinite mana outlet is Walking Ballista. With this card, we'll be able to put as many +1/+1 counters on it as we need to. We can then remove those counters to deal direct damage to our opponents and take them out. Krark Clan Ironworks, aka KCI, also works in place of Ashnod's Altar in this combo. KCI can also be combined with Scrap Trawler, Soul Ring, Junk Diver, and Mer Retriever to create infinite colorless mana. We actually have a few other ways to generate infinite mana. One would be the combination of Basalt Monolith and Rings of Brighthearth. With this one, we tap the Basalt Monolith to add 3 mana, then pay 3 mana to activate its ability, untapping it. When we activate the untap ability, Rings of Brighthearth triggers and we can pay 2 to copy the ability. With 2 untapped triggers on the stack, we let the first one resolve and we untap the monolith. Before the next untap ability resolves, we tap the monolith to add 3 colorless mana. Then we let the last untap ability resolve, untapping the monolith again. If we tap the monolith again, that leaves us with a total of 6 floating mana. We use 3 of that to activate the monolith's untap ability and 2 to copy it, leaving us with 1 floating mana. We can now repeat those steps over and over, netting 1 mana every time and generating infinite mana. Next up, we have a couple combos that involve Metalworker. The first is simple. It's Metalworker equipped with Umbral Mantle. As long as Metalworker can tap for 4 mana or more, meaning we have at least 2 artifacts in our hand, then we can infinitely tap Metalworker for mana, and then use that mana to untap Metalworker with Umbral Mantle. Not only will this generate infinite colorless mana, but it will also allow us to make Metalworker as big as we want, so we can swing in on someone that doesn't have any blockers and kill them. The other combo with Metalworker includes Rings of Brighthearth and Voltaic Key. Again, Metalworker just needs to be able to tap for 4 mana. What we do here is we tap Metalworker for the mana, using 1 mana to activate Voltaic Key, and then use 2 mana to copy Voltaic Key's ability. This leaves us with 1 floating mana, but allows us to untap Metalworker and Voltaic Key, thus generating infinite colorless mana. Finally, we come to my favorite combo in the deck, Mystic Forge combined with Sensei's Divining Top, and a card like Foundry Inspector. With these 3 cards on the battlefield, we'll be able to draw our entire deck. Here's how. With Sensei's Divining Top, when we tap it for its ability, it draws us a card and then puts itself on top of our library. Mystic Forge allows us to play cards off the top of our library if the card is an artifact. So we can cast the top from our library, and we don't have to pay any mana to cast it, since Foundry Inspector reduces the cost of artifacts by 1. Therefore, we can continue to cast the top from our library and use it to draw a card over and over until we have the pieces we need to win the game. Now, our commander will help us find our combo pieces, of course, but it's always good to have a little backup. Adding some card draw and tutors to this deck will help us find those combo pieces even faster. The obvious inclusion here is Enlightened Tutor. This card is cheap at 1 mana, can be cast at instant speed, and allows us to tutor an artifact and put it on top of our library. Almost all of our combo pieces are artifacts, so this will help out immensely. It can also be used to grab a Soul Ring for ramp in the early turns of the game. Recruiter of the Guard is another great tutor in this deck. When this creature enters the battlefield, we can search our library for a creature card with toughness 2 or less and put it into our hand. The most common target for this ability is going to be Tashar because, as you saw earlier, he's involved in many of our combos. But if we need to, we can also use this to tutor up something like Junk Diver, Scrap Trawler, or even Foundry Inspector. Next up is Esper Sentinel. Whenever one of our opponents casts their first non-creature spell each turn, they're going to have to pay a minimum of 1 additional mana to cast that spell. If they don't, we get to draw a card. This is a worse heuristic study, but at a much cheaper mana cost. Eker Wellspring will help us draw some additional cards as well. This is a 2 mana artifact that cantrips when it enters the battlefield. What's nice about this is it's also a great artifact to sacrifice to Oswald's ability because it doesn't do anything while it's on the battlefield, and we'll get to draw a second card when it goes to our graveyard. We also have quite a few combo pieces at 3 mana, so it works out really well. Mycosynth Wellspring does pretty much the same, but instead of drawing a card, we search for a basic land and put it into our hand. We're still drawing a card off of this, it's just a specific kind of card, so this might be a little bit worse in some cases, but could also help us hit our land drops, so I think it's worth running. The last card I'll mention here is Kozilek, Butcher of Truth. With decks that are able to ramp as fast as this one is, I sometimes like to run just 1 Eldrazi Titan for fun. This could be seen as an alternate win condition because of the fact that it's a big body and has that Annihilator 4 ability. But the reason I picked this one over, say, Ulamog the Infinite Gyre is because of the casting trigger. Card draw is hard to come by in mono white, and this ability draws us 4 cards, so this is going to help us out a lot. Now to wrap things up, let's talk about the utility lands we're running. First off, it's worth noting that we're running a few lands that also have the artifact card type. There are 2 reasons for this. The first is because of cards like Mox Opal or Metalworker. These cards care about artifacts in one way or another, so having lands like Ancient Den or Darksteel Citadel help these cards perform to their fullest potential. The other reason is because we can sacrifice these lands to Oswald. So if we're short on artifacts or don't want to get rid of any of the other artifacts we control, we can sacrifice one of these lands and go get something like a Soul Ring or a Mana Vault to ramp us. The third and final artifact land in the deck is Treasure Vault. This is a new card from Adventures of the Forgotten Realms. Not only is it an artifact land, but it also has the ability to generate treasure tokens with its second ability. So if we have some unused mana on one of our turns, this will help us put that mana to work. Next up is Aiganjo Castle. Now this card doesn't really look like much, and honestly it may not be. But the way that I look at it is this is strictly better than a basic Plains card. This is a land that taps for 1 white mana and enters the battlefield untapped, which is exactly what a basic Plains does for us. It also has another activated ability that says prevent the next 2 damage that would be dealt to target legendary creature this turn. So if someone is targeting our commander with a lightning bolt or something like that, we can prevent that card from killing him. Buried Ruin is always a great inclusion for artifact decks. This will allow us to return a needed artifact like a combo piece or an artifact that we sacrificed with Oswald back to our hand. We're running a couple modal double-faced land cards in Emeria's Call and Ondu Inversion. Emeria's Call can be cast for 7 mana to create 2 4/4 flyers, and the flip side is a land that can enter untapped if we're willing to pay 3 life. Ondu Inversion is an 8 mana board wipe that destroys all non-land permanents. The flip side is a land that taps for white and enters tapped. I love these because they're flexible. If we need the land, we can play the land. If we don't, it provides some value rather than being a dead card in our hand. War Room is another great land. This one helps us keep up with card draw. Its second ability lets us pay 3 mana, tap it, and pay 1 life to draw a card, which is excellent value for an ability on a land. Finally, we have probably the best utility land in the deck, and that's Urza's Saga. This is a land that is also a saga. When it comes into play and gets its first verse counter, it gains the ability to tap for 1 colorless mana. So right off the bat, it's essentially a colorless land that enters untapped. At our next upkeep, it gets its second verse counter, giving it the ability to create a token with power and toughness equal to the number of artifacts we control. At the upkeep after that is when it helps out the most. At this point, Urza's Saga gets its third verse counter and must be sacrificed. However, when it gets that third verse counter, we search our library for an artifact with 0 or 1 CMC and put it onto the battlefield. So this is basically going to turn our colorless land into a Soul Ring, Mana Crypt, or Mana Vault, depending on the situation. This is easily the best land in the deck. So that's it. Let me know what you thought down in the comments below. You can also follow the Manifix on Twitter and Instagram using the tags in the description. And as always, thanks for getting your fix with me today. Stay safe out there. Peace out, guys.